What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And today we're going to be kind of going off the off-beaten path in Pioneer this week. This is a deck that I thought was really interesting to go over. It's a deck that was very good in its time in Standard. Has gotten a few toys getting to like upgrade to the Pioneer format, and I think it's a deck that is kind of cool and is kind of like a fit for people that maybe want to play a more like tempo-y kind of like control strategy. So today we're going to be taking a look at rogues, more specifically Dimir rogues for the Pioneer format. Of course, before we get too deep into it, if you are not already subscribed to the channel and you like seeing Pioneer videos, you like watching modern videos, things like that, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you know when I post those videos. If you go into the description of this video, there are two links. One goes to my Twitch channel. Go ahead and follow me on Twitch if you want to see, know when I go live, playing some modern other video games, stuff like that. And of course, there's a link to the Discord server. Feel free to join down there as well. So for those not initiated, uh, Blue Black Rogues or Dimir Rogues has been kind of an archetype in its time at Standard when we had sets like the Zendikar Rising, stuff like that, along with some other like random rogues and stuff from like the M21. We got this new one from March of the Machines and Fairy Mastermind, which is actually Yuta Takahashi's World Championship card, which is really nice. So essentially, like rogues is this tempo-y, like you can you can mill your opponent and get some like bonus effects and kind of get paid off for doing that sort of thing, which of course like we are going to be able to go over in that as we continue on through the deck. uh, None of the creatures in this deck, no pun intended, are very flashy. Like we have Thieves Guild Enforcer, which when it enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 2 cards, and as we can see, is kind of like a mechanic of sorts for like these rogues, where it's like sort of kind of threshold, but in the reverse, where like your opponent has to have 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Threshold being 7 for yourself, but if you have 8 or more cards in your in your opponent's graveyard, Thieves Guild Enforcer gets +2/+1 and has Death Touch. So essentially, it becomes like a sort of like a Black Delver, if you will. It'll gets up to a 3/2, has Death Touch, can trade, makes combat a little weird, especially with like you're attacking with it. Your opponent like just simply can't chump block it because obviously it's the Thieves Guild Enforcer is going to be bigger than whatever it's attacking into. And then if your opponent blocks with something bigger, I mean, like you're trading essentially a 1 mana, for creature for a 2, 3, or 4 mana creature, which is pretty good. Turns out. You have cards like Fairy Mastermind and Soaring Thought Thief in like the 2-drop slot. Brazen Borrower getting the honorary 2-drop because you can petty theft something and then cast this for 3 mana on your turn or on your opponent's turn with having flash. Fairy Mastermind being the new card from March of the Machines, being a 2 mana 2/1 flyer with flash is very good. Just very aggressive, already being like a 2 mana 2/1. Whenever your opponent draws their second card for each turn, you draw a card. So essentially, like if they draw their second card, you are also going to draw a card, and you can pay 4 mana to have each player draw a card, which a lot of the time, like if you're activating that on your opponent's turn, essentially like you're getting to draw 2 cards. You get to like they're going to get to draw their card, sure, and then you're going to get to draw a card from the ability and then draw a card because your opponent is drawing their second card for the turn. Which is very good. I mean, 4 mana instant speed draw 2 has been something that's been like playable in like standard and like other formats as well. So why isn't it legal or playable in Pioneer, especially when you get it attached to a body that essentially gives you like a mana sink later in the game? You have Soaring Thought Thief, which is a card that we saw prominently in the Blue Black Rogues deck of old when it was in Standard. If your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, rogues you control get +1/+0, which means that your Fairy Masterminds, Thieves Guild Enforcer, Borrower, and Scavenger all get 1 power bigger, which is very good, and especially in a deck that like wants to be aggressive, very, very powerful. Whenever one or more rogues you controls attacks, each opponent mills 2 cards. So you don't even have to necessarily get in with the Soaring Thought Thief. You can get in with like maybe another creature, maybe like a Thieves Guild Enforcer, and maybe force some trades, also getting to mill your opponent. And of course, making your rogues bigger and just, generally just putting pressure on your opponent with the fact that like it's a lord that you can play at instant speed. On top of that, like milling your opponent as well. Brazen Borrow we went over is kind of like this tempo-y kind of like removal, bouncing something to your opponent's hand, and then having a 3/1 that you can just flash into play when you have the available mana to do so. Nighthawk Scavenger is a one of, just ends up being a big flying Death Touch lifelink creature that could really just chunk your opponent. Its power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyards. Of course, when you're milling your opponent and you want them to have at least 8 cards in there, there's probably going to be at least like we'll say 2 to 4 types, which means that it's probably going to be like a 5-6 power creature, which in the air attacking is going to be lots of damage. You have Kaito, which can phase out if it enters the battlefield that turn. +1, you can draw a card, the discard card unless you attack this turn. More than likely, you're going to be attacking, so that +1 is just going to be a straight up draw card. You can create a 1/1 ninja with this creature can't be blocked, which doesn't get buffed by any like the rogue stuff, but could be a way to help you push some damage. And you get an emblem with whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to players. Search your library for a blue or black creature card, put it on the battlefield, and then shuffle. You can have multiples of all of these cards in play. So having like multiple Thieves Guild Enforcers, just getting to search out more Thieves Guild Enforcers or more Soaring Thought Thieves to get more power, Fairy Mastermind, so on and so forth. I don't know how. I imagine like multiple of like Fairy Mastermind means that like if your opponent draws their second card each turn, and you have 2 of these in play, that you just draw 2 cards from that. But I'm not for sure, but that'd be really sweet, and I would imagine that that's how that would work, but you never know. So those are like the creatures. Like you get to be slightly disruptive. You get to make combat a little weird for your opponent. Kaito kind of give you a little bit of card advantage. The spells, like you have Fatal Push, Spell Pierce, Thoughtseize. Nothing different that I would expect from a Dimir deck. 4 Drown on the Lock, of course. Is like a pseudo counter. I mean, it is more than likely going to be a straight up counter spell and just a straight up like removal spell for whatever your opponent has to play. Thoughtseize, like the ultimate disruptive piece. Take the best card out of their hand. They have a Wrath, take their Wrath, so then your creatures get to run wild, and they have to beat some of your very efficient creatures with like 1/1 for removal. Also, of course, just being able to make sure the coast is clear to resolve some of your big threats. Spell Pierce, just getting to be mildly disruptive, where you can kind of like play off curve, like a turn, and be able to protect yourself against like counter spells and like removal spells. Fatal Push, being able to force your creatures through if your opponent ends up actually playing flyers or something like that. Fatal Push can just clear the way and clear the skies and, get in for help you push like tons and tons of damage while also getting to stay ahead on board. You have a Go for the Throat as like a one of, instant speed targeted removal, target on an artifact creature. It's going to end up just killing a lot of the creatures in the format without having to lose 2 life like Death Grasp would cause you to do. Children's Edict kind of is like an answer for planeswalkers, answer for creature tokens and non-token creatures. Agadeem's Awakening can be played as a land untapped if you pay 3 life. Also, just being able to return maybe like a Nighthawk Scavenger, a Soaring Thought Thief, and like a Thieves Guild Enforcer. 6 mana gets to put like 3 creatures into play and, just get to do these things and stuff with it. I mean, it's pretty good. Like Agadeem's Awakening, isn't like just a total knockout, but just something that you can do with some of the extra mana lying around. Into the Story being a 7 mana draw for instant speed, but costs 3 less to cast if your opponent has 7 or more cards in their graveyard. So it goes down to a 4 mana, like just draw 4, which is an amazing way to gas back up in this deck and kind of a way that you can get ahead on card advantage as well. If the game goes long, like this is your last card and like you're just milling your opponent and like you just play like your last creature and then you into the story. I mean, you're just so far ahead of your opponent. It's insane. The mana base, you have 2 Otawara, basically standard at this point to have some amount of like the channel lands and stuff. You have just Otawara. It doesn't look like any no Takanuma in this list. You have Watery Grave, Dark Slick Shores, and Clearwater Pathway / Murkwater Pathway as like your dual lands of choice. You have Hive of the Eye Tyrant, which is a way to like mess with people's graveyards. Also, just getting a 3/3 with Menace just makes it combat very hard. You have a Castle Locthwain to end up drawing cards if you kind of run out. Castle Locthwain has kind of been this like a kind of a premium for like drawing drawing a card with like your lands and stuff like that. I mean, having 4 mana, I mean, like you are going to have a decent enough like time where like you're going to be able to hit 4 lands pretty regularly and just be able to draw cards with an empty hand with castle and really only lose a life for it. You have some basic lands, of course, to like kind of round out the mana base. And the sideboard, just kind of looking like what you would expect. You have more duresses for a little bit more disruption in the matchups that matter. You have like Rave Enfeeblement against for like mono white. You have negates to kind of fight against opposing like wraths and things like that. Unlicensed Hearse, more stuff to mess with the graveyard. Like getting rid of like key cards from like your opponent's graveyard. Like Unlicensed Hearse is going to get huge when you're just milling them for tons of cards, and like you're just getting 2 every turn, and then eventually like you're able to draw enough removal spells to kind of like push a Hearse through to get the last 10 points of damage in. Invasion of Amonkhet, this is one of the battles from the March Machine set, which makes each player mill 3 cards, and then each opponent discards a card and you draw a card. It's just a lot of value for 3 mana. Draws you a card, essentially replaces itself, mills 3 cards, and makes your opponent discards a card, essentially putting 4 cards in the graveyard, which gets you halfway to some of your thieves, or I'm sorry, your rogues, like to make them special, essentially. You have Mystical Dispute, which is like can be a cheap counterspell against like the blue decks. Nighthawk Scavenger just to go a little bit bigger over the top against your opponents, and 1 Shieldred from the March Machine set, not Shieldred the Apocalypse, thank goodness. Forces your opponent to sacrifice a non-token creature, a planeswalker. You pay 5 mana to flip it, and it just absolutely decimates like your opponent, getting to destroy one of their creatures or planeswalkers, make them discard 3 cards, then mill 3 cards, which again puts you very, very close to having your rogues kind of like hit some of their special abilities, and then getting to put all the creatures from all graveyards into play, and then getting the Shieldred back as well to then force your opponent to sacrifice creatures. Just an overwhelming amount of advantage that you can get, and like being able to get back some of your own things, maybe against like control and that. Very, very good. And that is Dimir Rogues for the Pioneer format. Just a deck that's kind of like off the beaten path. I mean, this it's pretty sweet. It's definitely like a neat tempo strategy. I mean, we've seen people like play Mono Blue, and Mono Blue has like always kind of been the thing. And Rogues, I think, is a deck that is like just almost there. And while I don't think Fairy Mastermind makes this deck like necessarily like tier 1 or maybe even tier 1.5, it's definitely worth taking another look at it just because you get another rogue that's, comes in at instant speed. Really 14 of its 15 creatures can be played at any point like in the turn, which is, very, very good for this deck. And just the fact that it does have a slew of like removal spells, some counter magic, and some disruption, to where you can just get like that incremental advantage to where you can just keep inching farther and farther away for your opponent and make it a lot harder for them to kind of steer the game back in their favor. That said, usually with decks like this, and you'll find with like any tempo deck that you decide to play, or any deck that tries to put a clock into play plus disrupt, if it gets behind, it is very, very hard for it to catch up. I think one of the ways for this deck to catch up is to play like cards like Into the Story, or have like a story or a Fairy Mastermind, excuse me, and then just being able to like draw cards. And I think while your opponent is getting to draw cards, you're just hoping that the cards you draw are a little bit more impactful than the ones that they draw. But like Into the Story is definitely going to be one of the ways that you just really like catapult ahead and try to like fight to bring things even if you end up getting behind with this deck. But nonetheless, I think it has very satisfying play patterns. It definitely has you doing something that you want to be doing as like a Magic player, and like when you just kind of like feel like you're one step ahead of your opponent every turn, Rogues will definitely give you that sort of feeling, and you can kind of close out the game a little bit quicker than most decks too that like to play that style. So that's gonna do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed. Again, if you have not already subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing with your notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. Go to the links in the description of this video, one to the Discord server, one to Twitch. Follow them, follow me on Twitch, join the Discord server, all that fun stuff. That's going to do it for me. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next video.